Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And first observation is I hope you've all managed to get some food, because I was towards the end of the queue and it was looking a little bit worrying for me as to what food was left. And there's nothing worse than presenting to a hungry audience. So I'm hoping that you've managed to be well fed and well watered. So thank you for the introduction. My name's Justin Coker. I'm the VP EMEA for Skybox Security. We're leaders in the field of proactive risk management. We're a US company headquartered in Silicon Valley. We've been in the market since 2002. We operated in stealth mode for the first 2 years, and then we've been in the active market since 2004. And Skybox have the privilege of working with around 300 of the world's most complex and most sensitive networks. Before I started today, I just wanted to pick up a couple of quotes that have been around in the last few weeks. For those of you who were lucky enough to go to RSA in San Francisco, I wasn't, by the way, but if any of you were, there were some very good press articles that came out around that time. There was a chap called Mark Hatton, and he came out with an article in Security Week, and his title was "How a CISO Can Be a Change Agent Within a Company." The questions that he was coming out with were the questions that CISOs are being asked by their boards, and they're increasingly business-led and risk-led questions. They're also very simple questions, and they're questions that I've been hearing in the last 10, 15 years that I've been involved in security management. I'll just read some of them out for you. Am I more secure than I was yesterday? What is the greatest threat to our organization? What should I expect risk to look like? What's my best case scenario? What should we budget for to effectively manage our risk? And these are the type of questions that the CISO is facing when he goes to engage with a member of the board on a regular basis. And it's been very difficult for the CISO to give an honest answer to these questions. So that gives you a feel from a business perspective, from a governance perspective and a leadership perspective, where the challenge is. From the cyber world, we all hear about the press articles that are out there. For those of you who read the Metro this morning, it may have been mentioned this morning, but there was an article in the Metro about North Korea, South Korea. There were apparently, the reason that the CISOs are increasingly being engaged by the board is that these press articles are out there more and more. They were I can't remember the exact amount, but I remember I was at the ISF event a week ago, and it was pointed out how many mentions the word malware came up in the FT, for example. And as a result of this broadened media coverage of IT security and also cyber security increasingly, there is more engagement from the top to the CISOs and the organizations that have to provide the IT security, the defense against this threat, whether it's perceived or actual. Now, if we look at some of the intelligence that's come out, for example, the security firm Mandiant threw down the gauntlet recently about the type of attacks tracing exploits of 141 businesses across 20 industries to a single group based in China, which was dubbed APT1. If you look at a group of leading cybersecurity experts last Tuesday presented in the Senate to the US government based on what their main risks that they were facing, and cybersecurity was positioned as number one, ahead of terrorism as the main threat that could affect the US. So whichever way you turn, it's there, and organizations and leaders in the organizations are going to be turning to us, or in effect the community, to say, well, what do we do about this? How do we answer these questions? What I'm going to be talking about today is situational awareness. It'd be interesting to get a straw poll out there of how many people have heard of the term situational awareness. So I would say probably 50%. It's certainly a phrase that we're hearing a lot. And to give you a definition of, if you look on WikiLeaks, what situational awareness is, situational awareness involves being aware of what's happening around you to understand how information, events, and one's own actions will impact objectives both immediately and in the near future. So that's the theme for today. I'll tell you a little bit about Skybox, the organisation. As I mentioned, we've been around in the market for over 10 years now. We are leaders in the realm of proactive security risk management. There's a couple of quotes up there from Phil Schachter from Gartner and John Kindervag from Forrester. Skybox is growing very quickly as an organisation. We've quadrupled our revenue in the last 3 years, and we're experiencing exponential growth in the region of 230% year-on-year growth. There's a reason for that, and I think it's because of the growing need for risk management solutions which are proactive as opposed to the traditional reactive solutions out there. So just to give you an idea of our client base, we have over 300 of the world's largest and most complex organisations. We have 5 NATO military deployments, and we have a very diverse range of industries that we work with. Just as the Mandiant report showed that there were 20 different verticals, and although we did start off in the finance sector and with the investment banks and the military, for example, we're now seeing this as a much broader requirement across many different verticals. To give you an idea of some of our clients, you will see that the usual suspects on the left there are the banks and the finance companies. We work with the lion's share of, if you like, the big global organisations, and they realised that it's just looking at what's happened in the past or what's happening right now isn't necessarily solving the problem, and they obviously understand risk because that's the language that they speak in their boardrooms. But we've increasingly seen a requirement from critical national infrastructure verticals such as telcos, government, both central government and recently local government. Also, we've seen demand come from industries that we wouldn't have previously expected. So industries where the availability wasn't key. And I think we've seen a change from organisations worrying about losing availability of systems increasingly to organisations worried about losing confidentiality of systems. So, for example, that could be Formula One organisations, it could be drug companies, it could be engineering companies who've got very clever IP that they want to protect against the intergovernmental or cyber espionage threat origins that are out there. Also, we're seeing that organisations need to translate technology to the boardroom, not just in a measure of risk, but in a measure of efficiency and bottom line savings. And those two things can come hand in hand, and I'm going to explain that. So we're very privileged to be in all these different organisations, and they all have their own challenges, but we've picked up on some of the key challenges that are being faced. Too much security data, trying to find the needles in the haystacks. We've worked with one organisation that has over 1 million events per second coming through their secure operations centre. It's not uncommon to have 10,000 to 100,000 events per second coming through a security operations centre. Secondly, compliance. Organisations have to be compliant now on many different levels, but that can include compliance on devices, not just servers, but increasingly firewalls. It could be network devices. And organisations have a lot of these devices. To do that manually and to bring auditors in all the time is a long process and a very expensive process. So organisations are looking at ways that they can automate these compliance processes. Managing change securely. When you have a large, complex environment and you don't necessarily understand how it all fits together, or maybe you've got an outsourced environment and you've trusted an outsourced provider to provide change within your organisation, for example, changing a firewall rule, organisations are increasingly concerned that this is part of the process that's introducing the most, one area that's introducing the most risk by opening doors and windows and not really knowing whether they're opening an attack vector at the same time. Understanding risk, we talked about that earlier as far as understanding the risk, but also communicating that risk back to the board or the leadership of the organisation. And finally, you're here today because of the evolving threat landscape. We're not just talking about kids defacing websites anymore, as happened 10 years ago. Now it's a much more industrialised threat that we're facing. It's crossing boundaries, and it's potentially not just individuals, it's organised crime and potentially governments as well. So here's my one slide on Skybox. I won't go too much into it, but just to give you a feel on what we do before I then go into the topic for today. Skybox is a modelling technology. Just as all of you use models every day, you have a GPS that helps you get from A to B, you use a spreadsheet, you look at the weather, which is generated by a modelling system, you use Google Earth, Google Maps. All of these things are models. In the engineering industry, CAD/CAM revolutionised the engineering industry because it allowed a model to give people an accurate view. What we do is not rocket science in that respect, it's just applying the same modelling approach but to your computer networks, your battlefield. Once we have a view of the model, we can do lots of things with the model. So we can interrogate all the necessary components within your network, whether those are firewalls, the way that they're configured, the way they all hang together, whether the doors and windows are left open, whether the firewalls and the routers are locked down to best practice standards. Also, just having a network visibility, I can't tell you the amount of times that we've seen a real change in an organisation once they've been able to show what their network looks like for the first time. The human brain is very visual. In order to take in a lot of information, we like to see a picture, hence the phrase, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Handing a telephone directory report to a senior exec is not going to get you very far because they will probably get through the first page and then put it aside. However, we were privileged to work with Lloyds Banking Group and HBOS during their merger. They had 2 divisional risk committees, each of which were concerned about their own environment, never mind putting the 2 networks together, and weren't able to sign off on conjoining the 2 networks, which was potentially going to enable over 2 billion of integration savings, which as taxpayers we of course wanted them to do. We were able within 2 months to go in and create a global model of each of those global banks, and they had 5 outsourced providers. And when we were able to physically show them a model and they could see it, the whole thing changed, because then the organisation could understand their perimeter for the first time. They could understand the risk within their own environment before they then looked to join the risk, their environment to another environment. The analogy they gave us was that it was like trying to connect the space shuttle to the International Space Station. Each of these 2 entities were very complex, well-engineered objects, if you like, that worked very well in their own right, and they each had a very hostile environment on the outside. they were being required to plug these two together, making sure that if, for example, a fire or an explosion happened on one side, it wouldn't take down both. And this was the challenge that we were faced with. So visibility is important. When you can see something, whether it's Google Earth, you can drill in from the whole of the world down to your back garden. That capability is equally as applicable for a network, and trying to explain your security posture or trying to analyse where something is works very well when you look at it from a network visibility perspective. So because we have a model, we can then look at putting the vulnerabilities in the right place on the model, the firewalls, the defences, the controls in the right place in the model, just as in the old days when battles were fought, Napoleon would try and get to the highest vantage point up the biggest hill he could possibly find in order to see the battlefield and to direct that battle. We are providing a similar capability here, that unless you know your own battlefield, unless you know your own controls within that battlefield, where they are aligned, how well configured they are, and are they protecting from the bad guys out there. So the piece I'm going to focus on today is this right-hand piece, which is around cyber threat management. And this works on the basis of the battlefield. And I'm going to use an analogy here to try and give you a view of the game that we're involved in, and also the future and how the game's going to change. So we all know chess. It's a game of two sides, black and white. There's a defined battlefield. It's a chessboard, which is 8 by 8. It's a defined set of moves. Each player will take one move at a time. You have a clear objective within the game of chess, which is, in effect, to checkmate the opponent or stalemate if you can't get checkmate. In order to win at chess, you have to understand your own strength. It's a game of attack and defense. You attack when you're strong, you defend when you're weak. If we compare this to the reality of the game we're playing, it's very different, because the rules are more unfair. First of all, it's not an attack and defense game. You can only defend. Secondly, it's not a one-on-one move ratio. Typically now, with the rise of the likes of Anonymous, for example, with a collective or a swarm approach, global, 24/7 in nature, we estimate that under a sustained attack by that type of organisation, you're probably at a 30-to-1 disadvantage. Organisations only have a certain amount of resource, and they often work 9 to 5. They don't work 24/7. If we look at the attack vectors, it's much more complicated than a game of chess. We know in a game of chess that a bishop can move one way, a knight can move another way. It's all fairly straightforward. Within today's environment, there are a plethora of different attack vectors. That makes it much more difficult to know where the attacks are potentially going to come from. And if you see an attack happening, where is it going to go next? Also, the technology vendors have been doing a very good job of selling solutions or point products, if you like, to organisations to try and protect you. And even though I'm a vendor, I'm not a great believer in that silver bullet approach. I think organisations have had lots of silver bullets thrown at them, whether it was intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, etc., etc. All of these solutions, DLP, etc., have been thwarted as almost a silver bullet that they can help solve the problem. Now, that also creates its own complexity, because you have a lot of these different point products and solutions in the organisation which need skilled people and resources in order to manage them. And often they don't talk to each other either. To your enemies, that's an advantage because they can work around those different technologies and you may not be covering all of them at the same time. So when we really and honestly look at our security defences and ask ourselves that question, are we winning? Are we stopping these attacks? I wonder what the answer really is. I was talking to the people involved in the RSA incident who were on the ground, and RSA are a security vendor. They have a great SIM product. However, the SIM solution didn't see the attack happening. It was actually picked up forensically, and the attack was actually happening for quite some time. So if an organisation like RSA can't pick up an attack, then it's not an easy battle for us to win. So I'm going to highlight some of the areas where the traditional approach falls down. Organisations are trying to get a view of all the vulnerabilities they have, and they do that by using vulnerability scanners. Often vulnerability scanners can't penetrate the whole organisation. They can be disruptive, and they produce a mass of data, typically 40 to 50 vulnerabilities per server. For those of you who know of the SIEM solution set, which is Security Information and Event Management Suite, these are aggregating lots of security event and alert data and log data. Firstly, it's stuff that's happened, so it's or happening. However, we are finding that it's just aggregating masses and masses of data, as I was saying, potentially up to tens, hundreds, even millions of events per second. That is just impossible to try and get your head around without some sort of automation. And these tools are very useful for compliance, but they're not necessarily useful to give you that situational awareness, that view of where are we, what's happening. Configuration management. Organisations are trying to lock down the configurations, the doors, windows, the firewalls, the routers, the IPS devices, the controls. Often that's done in isolation, it's not done holistically. A lot of organisations we talk to have got intrusion prevention systems, but they're not necessarily configured very well, and they might be in the wrong place in the network. Pen tests. Whilst pen tests have been very useful, they're also required because of a lot of compliance. They are subjective in nature. They tend to look at part of the estate, and by the time the report arrives, something's probably changed. So they're not necessarily accurate when you read the report, because anything could have changed from a firewall to a vulnerability in the meantime. This is the bad bit. You have to bear with me. There is a I wouldn't say a Hollywood ending, but there is a happy ending. If we look at the game as it is now, and look at the attack surface, with the proliferation of different IP growth, IPv6, mobile security, etc. If we look at 2011 alone, mobile data was up 132%, mobile threats up 400%. And this is at the early part of the curve. If you look at the virtualization, there were more virtualized servers deployed in 2011 than in the 8 years or 9 years preceding that. These are all still controlled, still devices, they're still part of your network. Because they're virtual, they can be pushed out much quicker, and therefore the complexity is growing. The advent of cloud, or even bring your own cloud now, is a potential part of the equation. So really, the game's changing, and it's changing very, very quickly. And when you look at it this way, it then becomes evident that the current approach doesn't really scale. So either you go and employ an army of people, buy a lot of technology, switch it on, and hope that you get the right answer. Or you look at a way of scaling to that new environment in the next 2 to 3 years. So how is it possible? Well, we know the attack surface, but maybe you can't see it, but it is there. It's your infrastructure. It's not their infrastructure. So a good place to start is to see it. See what it is you're protecting and understand where all your controls are within that battlefield. Where are your pieces on the chessboard? How strong are you? Are you in a position of strength? How are your pieces working together in order to protect you? And how do you manage that cost effectively? As I've mentioned, normally employing an army of consultants or outside resources is not an option. The other issue is that you can't do this once a year. We've talked to some organisations that try and do a manual effort like this once a year, which is admirable. However, you're lucky, because if you catch something at that point in time, then that's great. However, if you're out of cycle, and that's you then have a window of exposure of a whole year until you do it again. And if you try and automate that more than once a year, maybe quarterly, then the cost goes up. But you've still then got a quarter of exposure in between each of those risk assessments. So there is hope out there because it's your enterprise. Modelling technology is not new. It's been used for a long time. Organisations like ours are capable of modelling that in a secure and reliable way so that you can see the chessboard. The pieces of the jigsaw or the pieces of the chessboard have to be integrated, so you need to see how your knights and bishops and pawns actually can help each other, whereas traditionally the approach has been to look at each of these pieces in isolation. Now, because it's your infrastructure, you can then have an advantage, because these type of automation tools are not available to the enemy. So you have the ability to automate the chessboard, they don't. So I'm going to give you a feel for what we do. Skybox has the capability to very quickly build your chessboard, your model of your enterprise, so that you can go to your manager or board and say, we're starting in the right place here, we're going to understand our own chessboard, we're going to understand our own network, how it hangs together, what the controls are that we've invested in, and how well they're configured. Are they in the right place? Are they helping each other? Our perimeter, so we can understand our perimeter. But importantly, we can then run the model, the war games model. We can run a virtual network pen test of your whole organisation on a daily basis. Some people just want this once a year, and that can be provided. Some people want it once a quarter. Other organisations want this every day. And what we tend to find is that once it's deployed and in, people don't want to pull it out. They don't want to wait 6 months or a year until the next risk assessment. Because we can focus on the stuff that really matters, that allows your resources to be used very well, almost with surgical precision. You can pinpoint the attack vectors that are threatening to steal the crown jewels, and you can shut the doors and windows that will prevent that from happening. It's a very old security adage, but really this is where we should be. We should be proactively stopping people come in, especially with the advent of the cyber espionage threat. IP, once it's gone, is gone. It might have taken organisations years and years to develop. I was talking to a chap this morning at a university. It's just as applicable for a university as it is for a bank. There's research, there's IP there which is valuable to the organisation and also to the country. So the idea here is to stop three things: the loss of confidential information, the loss of integrity of that information, or the loss of the availability of that information. Once we have the model, we can understand all the inputs to that model that can happen, whether that's from outside or inside attack vectors, human or non-human. We can look at simulating change before it happens. So what if on the model, just as you would do in a CAD/CAM world, you would break a model rather than crash a car. The idea is the same here. If you want to change a firewall rule, you want to deploy a particular network migration or make a major change within the organisation, why not model it and make sure it's right before you switch it on or press the button. Organisations are now using this to proactively check every new firewall change before it goes in to make sure there's not a horrible vulnerability right behind it that they're going to open up. And because the information is very relevant, we're only going to be pinpointing areas where there will be a direct impact to the organisation if it's not done. So we will only be pointing out the exposures that will cause the maximum damage to the organisation. So this is the language that the executives want to hear. Often we've seen that the security teams have gone to management with a technical explanation. It could be we're having an SQL injection. This is a bit of a problem. The management switch right off. But with our type of technology, we can show them, just like in Google Earth, you can have the map of the network. We can then zoom in and visualize from A to B, just like on your sat-nav on your car. This is point A, where the bad guys are. This is point B, where the crown jewels are. This is what's going to happen if we don't do something. And these are the steps that we've got in the way. We've got a firewall, we've got a router we can change the ACL on, we've got a vulnerability that we can patch, we can pull the server. Management get that because they can see it, they can understand the risk and they can understand what they can do about it. And having a solution is very important, not just having a problem. So these type of technologies are expert systems in their own right. They understand all the known issues. And for those of you who have read the Verizon data breach report, if you haven't, I would go to the web and look it up. It's a great piece of research. 97% of the reported incidents were down to known vulnerabilities or known misconfigurations that could have been prevented. I feel that the industry is pushing too much for the unknowns, the super clever unknown attacks that would make the headlines or provide the Hollywood end of the Hollywood story. But let's face it, if it was your house, you wouldn't be spending all night worrying about the next innovative way to burgle your house. You'd be shutting the doors and windows and making sure that the locks are on. And in effect, I think the industry, our advice from talking to a lot of our clients is that they're spending their energy on that 97%. The unknown unknowns, I think we can all try and get that type of information, but in reality, if somebody's going to really want to break in and they have that level of sophistication and intent, they probably will. However, what you can do is make your organisation as resilient as possible, and 97% of that risk can go away, and maybe they'll pick on somebody else. So, what does this new approach look like? Well, I've talked about proactive, not reactive. We hear about this in many walks of life, whether it's health, service, police force, great believers in proactive, stopping things happen, as are the military. If you work with the military, one thing that we found out working with the military is nobody gets any points for telling the commander that somebody broke into the base yesterday. That's kind of career limiting. However, telling the commander that somebody's on the way to the base and sending out a bunch of tough guys to stop them breaking in, well, that's great. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. So the reason I've entitled radar approach is that in the military, radar is what they use. It's proactive by nature. It's not rocket science. It was built around the Second World War. But the thing with radar is it tells the military what's coming. And more importantly, it doesn't tell them if there's a fighter plane flying over Australia, because that's not relevant. That doesn't give them situational awareness. However, if there was a fighter plane across the channel, that might be relevant. Equally, the radar would only focus on the stuff that is a threat, and they need a way of pulling out the false positives from that radar. So whether it's a real present danger, or whether it's a hot air balloon or a light aircraft, they need to be able to take that noise out. And the same approach applies here. The radar keeps moving. It's not a one-off. It keeps moving round and round all the time, because that's exactly the point of it, that we have to be proactive all the time. My advice is not just necessarily to look at this as a tool for the security team to look at risk, to look at compliance automation. It actually can generate a lot of bottom line savings. We enabled over 2 billion of early integration savings for Lloyds as part of the integration project. We allowed them to push those two networks together much quicker, which allowed them to have one branch platform, not two, one set of branches instead of two, one set of data centres instead of two. We worked with a large multinational brewing company that the CISO brought us in, and we gave him that battlefield view, the view of his network. They'd been buying lots of organisations. Every time they bought an organisation or a brewing plant, they would throw firewalls all around it. And they'd accumulated a real collection of a lot of devices. Just by looking at the big picture, they managed to strip out 18 million of unnecessary controls, and to put the controls in the right place, still reducing the risk at the same time. That's the type of thing that the board were very impressed with. And in that case, the board said that was the first time that somebody from security had actually come into the boardroom and told them something that they were actually really happy about and very glad to hear. So you can't do this piecemeal. You have to cover everything, because otherwise you're going to have blind spots in the organisation or dark parts of the network. And that technology is there now. So even if you have outsourced providers and you say, okay, well, so-and-so manages my network, well, we've been working with lots of government, military and commercial organisations to go under that, or to break through that brick wall that typically exists between the client and the outsourcer, because ultimately it's still your risk. Just because you've outsourced it to them doesn't outsource the problem. And because this is modelling technology, it's offline, it's not intrusive to the network, we've had great success in getting outsourced providers on board and being able to model their environment as well. So if you have that kind of challenge with outsourced providers, by all means come and talk to us, because we've got some great ways of trying to give you that visibility. Finally, the analytics. Again, that's what we do. We have a very capable team of people who are constantly writing the algorithms, the analytics that will look through all the data out there and make sense of it for you. So for those of you out there who want to have a technology view on this, I'm just going to give you a very high-level view of what we call the cyber SOC, and this is the type of architecture that we're working with the military, with some of the leading organisations, and we're now finding that there are some organisations that are building what they're calling cyber SOCs or next-generation SOCs, which rely on all three elements: the post-attack, which you'll see on the right-hand side, or the forensic piece, which is the historic view, the piece in the middle, which is the now, the burglar alarm, the security event and information management, but also the future. So if you think of it from a car analogy, it's looking out the front windscreen as well as the rear view mirror. All of these are important. You can't look at one without the other. And as we found with the RSA incident, they found an attack in the past that was still going on. But you could also, we found that we're working with the likes of the SIM providers. And for those of you who don't get this slide, don't worry, but there will be some out there who maybe do. But we're working with a lot of the security management players now to link all these pieces of the jigsaw together. So typically, you've got a SIM solution which is creating tens, hundreds, millions of events per second. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody didn't have to go through all of that? What organisations are doing is using the battlefield to give all that data context. So only let me know when you see the first step of a critical attack sequence in flight. At that point, please escalate it right to the top of the stack and tell us what options we have to deal with it. This is the type of model that we're working with now with a lot of organisations, whereby the interaction between the now, the past and the future is all done under the bonnet. The human piece is all in the response time and the process around it, so that organisations are now getting, in effect, only the stuff that's really going to come and bite them, and they can stop it happening before it proliferates. And that can either be before attack happens or during an attack sequence. And that can be presented up into that dashboard view. You may have heard of GRC or Situational Awareness. This is the type of view that the board want to see. Am I secure? Back to the original questions I had. Am I secure? What is our risk profile? Are we spending enough or not enough on managing that risk? And in effect, that's where we are at the moment. It's an exciting journey. If there's anything I've said today that resonates with you or you'd like to find out more about, we have a stand outside, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about this. And we find that this applies not just for the big organisations, but it's applying to anyone with potentially 10 firewalls or more.